Okay, so let's begin. Welcome everyone to this webinar on the Post-Globalization Supply Chain Movement. I am Hyodok Shin, a faculty member at Rady School of Management in University of California, San Diego. First of all, I wish that everyone is safe and well under this challenging time of the pandemic. COVID-19 exposed us to enormous challenges, in particular in the area of supply chains. However, bigger challenges come together with greater opportunities. Specifically, we noticed that in addition to the trade wars and geopolitics, the pandemic accelerated the rebalancing of the supply chains, which initiated this industry research project. This project is the result of substantial collaboration with many experts and stakeholders, and we could not have done it without their support. So I would like to recognize and thank them first. To begin with, both Helen Wang and Tom Linton, the industry advisory board members at the Institute for Supply Chain Excellence and Innovation at Rady School of Management in UC San Diego, helped us to initiate the project and all the way to carry the team to the finish line of this first phase of the project. I not only thank them, but also am looking forward to working with them more in the next phases of this project. Second, thanks to the Encarceria group who helped us on the cost benchmarking analysis and providing various information and guiding us to the insightful information sources. And third, I would like to recognize Professor Renee Bowen, the Director of Center for Commerce and Diplomacy at the School of Global Policy and Strategy at UC San Diego, who helped us on trade policies and geopolitics, in addition to connecting us to the next trade group, UN, and World Economic Forum. Last, and most importantly, all of the industry executive leaders who generously share their time, knowledge, and experience with us through numerous interviews and surveys. This project could not have done without your support. So thank you all. Now the presentation will begin. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A box to type your questions, and also feel free to use the option of anonymous. Okay, now, without further ado, let's kick it off. Marina.
Thank you, Dr. Shin, and thank you all for joining our webinar today. I'm Marina Shimizu, the project manager of the PGM project, and it is our privilege to present our outcome of the project. And I again would like to thank all industry experts who participated in our survey and interviews. Today's presentation will be 45 minutes long, followed by 15 minutes Q&A session. In the presentation, we will have introduction, methodology, result of Swot analysis, benchmark analysis, insight of COVID impact, prediction, and conclusion. The Post-Globalization Movement project is an industry research project which is headed by Professor Shin, Helen Wang from ISEI at Rady School of Management at UCSD, and supported by Tom Linton and Jimmy Anclesalier. Ashmi Piperia contributes to the cost benchmark analysis. She's from Anclesalier Group, a consulting firm specializing in supply chain cost analysis and management. The project is held by 6 UCSD students. 5 are from Rady School of Management in collaboration with another school at UCSD, the School of Global Policy and Strategy. We have a variety of background and backbone and culture. Marina, I'm from Tokyo. Daniel Henderson is from San Diego. Lorena Arellano is from Mexico. Avinav Kartikay is from India. Ying Zeng with PhD in chemistry. She is from China, and from the School of Global Policy and Strategy, we have Roseman, and he's from San Diego as well. We conducted survey and interviews to industry leaders, geographical experts, and academic experts to analyze and predict current and future supply chain strategies and movements and other trends in the post-globalization. Next, we will explain the background of post-globalization. Ethan, please jump in.
Thank you, Marina. To get a better understanding of how we arrived at what some considered the post-globalized era, we wanted to look at how the rise of globalization happened and the forces that played to that. So first, looking from post-World War II, 1948 to present time, with the recent terrors of the war in the past, along with the fall of the Berlin Wall, created kind of this single global market that the world was working with. In addition to that, the rise of technology and innovation, most notably the World Wide Web, the internet, as well as collaborative software, allowed for the ease of transportation of not only goods, but also people. And it allowed for companies to work on projects across borders much easier. This added to companies outsourcing and offshoring to capitalize on countries' comparative advantages, as well as lower cost that countries could offer. All of these things that kind of led to globalization were increased with trade agreements. Most notably was the World Trade Organization, formed in 1995, that increased trade between WTO members by 171% and between a WTO member and a non-member by 88%. That pushed us to kind of the 21st century and the increase of supply chaining, where companies started to actually think about where they would place certain aspects of their product around the country, around the world. This led to the movement of jobs, as well as the movement of a company's footprint, which, as we can see in the image below, kind of saw with originally the supply chain was with domestic manufacturing, moving to outsourcing and offshoring. And then what we've been talking about is kind of this new geographic rebalancing that is a potential in the near future. The movement of jobs, along with the increase of wealth inequality, added to the rise of populism and trade wars. This pushed a lot of political parties toward protectionism, which was most notably seen in the election of Trump in the United States, the United Kingdom's vote to leave the European Union, and also the rise of the Five-Star Movement in Italy. We could also see that the effects of COVID most recently helped as an accelerator of post-globalization because it shut down borders and froze the movement of goods and people. However, with the recent election of Biden in the United States, as well as the signing of new trade agreements, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership that China signed with 14 other countries, there is potentially this new push and this new movement past post-globalization to something that is potentially more regional. I will now pass it off where we will discuss the methodologies we took during this project.
Thanks, Ethan. So for the phase one of the project, we decided to choose the United States as a final customer since it's a fully developed economy. And also we chose China, Mexico, and India as the three strongest growing economies in terms of production and manufacturing. Moving on, as seen in the diagram, first, we will cover both breadth and depth of end-to-end supply chain. So in terms of breadth, we have 4 different streams: connector, upstream, midstream, and downstream, which each serve as a network between a company, its suppliers, and its customers. Each of these streams encompass different value chain locations from last tier suppliers, basically all the way up from raw material, and all the way down to the end customer. Also, in terms of depth into our analysis, we will cover these 8 specific value chain locations where raw material, component, and sub-assembly are from upstream, subsystem, system integrator midstream, brand, product, retail from downstream, and service providers such as logistics companies and consultants in connector. The depth also covers different industries, which will be explained in the following business category slide with Ying.
Thanks, Lorena. As Lorena said, the scope of this project was to study the end-to-end supply chain movement. So the company we studied could be any industry and could be any position in the supply chain. The companies we have studied in this project, we are divided into 3 categories by their specialties. Company manufacture goods and products, generate intellectual property and related technology. We categorize them as a manufacturers. For company design products, to generate intellectual property and related technology, this company outsourced their manufacture process. We categorize as products. For those company provide non-manufacturer service, we categorize as services. Different company have different features because of their their industry, their business strategy, and their focuses. We also categorize those features into 3 types. Some company may require large amount of capital investment to produce goods and have high percentage of fixed asset. They are capital intensive, like a lot of our manufacturers. Some company focus more on design new products, discovery new technology. Those are intellectual property focused. The availability of critical talent are very important to our products. Some company require large amount of labor, more labor than others to provide services. They are labor intensive. Each company could have 1 or more features, which depends on the business and the strategies. Like a lot of manufacturer, they are both capital intensive or labor intensive. And because of their feature, different company may take different movements in terms of supply chain management. In our analysis and projection, we will look at the supply chain movement in those 3 categories. The scope of our project also showed we would do directly compare China, US, India, and Mexico. So 5-dimension model was developed to do benchmarking and SWOT analysis for each country. Bottom line and the top line, well, businesses focuses. Those 2 dimensions are more about the internal business focus. Top line was the value company generated to customer, including quality and speed, etc. Top line was the cost factors businesses focus on, such as labor cost, material cost, tariffs, etc. The other 2 dimensions, soft power and hard power, were external business environment. Soft power was related to business culture and people, such as working culture, critical talent, and business ethics, etc. Hard power was focused on business condition and the environment. The business have no control about it, such as infrastructure, government policy, and trade policies, etc. The key metrics in each dimension, together with the 5th dimension, time, were combined to do analysis. The performance of those 4 dimensions for each country were analyzed in a 20-year time frame to project the trend of the supply chain movement. We have conducted online survey, Zoom interview, and literature research. Online survey was designed to connect objective data, such as the status of the company, the concern of the company, and the short-term and long-term plan. The interview was intended to connect the personal experience, objective opinions, and here I need to thank you again for all our participants. We have conducted in-depth SWOT analysis and benchmark analysis for these 4 countries. My teammates will discuss each dimension and key metrics in depth. So next, Daniel will jump in to discuss the detailed SWOT analysis of each country.
Thank you, Ying. So next, for our SWOT analysis, sorry, there we go. Okay, so for our SWOT analysis, the goal that we had was to get a sense of the combined perceptions and experiences of the executives we interviewed. So what we did is, from our interview notes, we took the mentions of each of our 4 highlighted countries, and we categorized this mention along 2 axes. One would be the country itself, and 2 would be the Swot category. So that is a strength, weakness, opportunity, or threat. So as you can see, looking at this graph, China got the most mentions overall of any country. And this is a reflection of simply the fact that supply chains are still largely concentrated in China. You'll notice also that if you look at the different heights of the bars, concentrating on China again, it got a lot of mentions for strengths. It also got a lot of mentions for threats. India, by contrast, had actually more mentions for weakness than it did for strengths. So in the next few slides, we're going to normalize each of these countries to sort of a 100% per country, and we're going to dive deeper into these specific country differences. Okay, starting with strengths, China is very, very strong in the hard power arena, and this is due to investments that the government has made over the past few decades with programs like One Belt, One Road, and also heavily invested in infrastructure as well, which increases ease of business. China's workforce was noted as being particularly skilled and educated, especially when it comes to manufacturing. And then China has historically been known for its low cost. It still does have a low labor cost, but this is not the chief advantage that it enjoys. And as we'll see, it's not even necessarily the leader here anymore. So moving on to India, you see bottom line and soft power, really quick. You'll see the legend on the bottom. You've got blue bottom line, orange hard power, gray soft power, and of course green for top line revenue-based characteristics. So yes, India is dominated by bottom line and soft power. This is reflected by its low labor cost and its talented labor force, particularly when it comes to IT and software competencies. Notable as well, its IP protection on the hard power arena. Mexico has a pretty even spread. It has very favorable trade relationships with the North American countries. It also has favorable government incentives with its maquiladora system, which is a foreign companies can come invest duty-free in factories in Mexico. So this increases incentives for production. You also have a low labor cost, but a comparatively high education rate among the labor force, which makes Mexico attractive. Moving to the US, you have a strong IP policy in the hard power arena. You also have a talented labor force, particularly in sectors such as software, agriculture, and services. And then most of the companies we talk to, a large percentage of their customers are in the United States, hence you see that top line strength there. Moving on to weaknesses, China IP policy has raised some concerns among our executives, with increasing costs also contributing to bottom line weaknesses. And product quality is seen as a top line risk factor here. Reputation for products made in China is not always the best. And then we also have a language basis for soft power that differs from company to company. India, the glaring weakness here is infrastructure and burdensome red tape. It was mentioned by almost all of our executives we interviewed. We also have a lack of clustering, which increases transportation costs and decreases speed. Mexico here, we have a large soft power weakness. And this mostly came about because our interviewees were concerned, especially thinking about moving from China to elsewhere, and Mexico being a prime candidate. They were often keen on cultural differences between Chinese and other Asian laborers and Mexican laborers, noting that in Mexico, there is a relatively high preference for work-life balance. As one of our interviewees put it simply but elegantly, in Mexico, life is more important than work. Naturally, there's going to be some difficulties in trying to sort of make sure that everything can work with a company culture. Many of our executives also mentioned the importance of instilling and inspiring company culture to sort of cross some of these cultural differences and integrate everything so that it works with company goals. Moving along to the United States, you have obviously high labor cost here and increasing. And you also have trade tensions contributing much to that hard power weakness category. Okay, moving on to opportunities. One important thing to note here is you see a lot of green here. So that's a lot of top line represented where it really was not very represented in the other two categories thus far. This just reflects the general shift of planning supply chains around demand rather than other factors such as cost. Many of the executives we talked to talked about the importance of going where the demand is. And so it would seem to reason that regionalization will be primarily driven by demand concerns, whereas globalization was driven primarily by cost concerns. Really quick to note, Mexico, you have a few other opportunity related areas as integration will help with the lack of clustering, and improving cost among the labor force will make Mexican labor even more attractive coming into the future. Okay, and finally getting to threats. You saw a lot of green with opportunities. Now we're seeing a lot of orange. So hard power threats are chiefly related to trade tensions. Really, wherever you go, in the US and China, obviously this was an issue, but even in Mexico, even if the involvement is not direct, you have some unintended consequences, such as sort of bottlenecking, having a lot of inventory come through Mexico where the infrastructure may not support it because you have a rush to get out of China with the anticipation of rising tariffs. China single sourcing was a unique issue, is a unique issue rather, because of the focus of globalization of getting production into China. This has companies thinking about how to better diversify so that they're not sort of caught dead with another pandemic or any disaster that causes the closure of China. This is what's known as the China Plus model, and we'll talk more about that later. And finally, India, the unique concern here with hard power is the poor government bureaucracy and concerns about corruption. So to round everything out, yes, to round everything out, some key takeaways from our SWOT analysis. So that is the general perceptions from our interviewees. We see China as an all-around performer with growing manufacturing capacity. Trade tensions are a red flag that will not derail the country, but certainly make it difficult to do business there and worthwhile to look elsewhere as well. India does have tremendous technical talent at a low cost, but its poor global trade connectivity and low ease of doing business make this really difficult to take advantage of right now. Mexico, on the other hand, is quickly developing the capacity it needs. You have companies moving in there. You have governments working with companies to increase ease of business. And you have the lucrative trade relationships, which I already mentioned, that seem to position Mexico as sort of an up-and-comer with exciting potential. And the USA, you have an innovation leader, a very large and growing market that will, for the foreseeable future at least, present opportunities. And then finally, a quick note is to see that opportunities seem to be driven mostly by market-related top-line factors, and threats, thinking of it as a defensive lever in the decisions of the supply chain, are driven mostly by hard power concerns. So we see cost kind of taking a back seat. While it's always been important, you see these demand and hard power related concerns maybe taking precedence in the post-globalization era. So that concludes the SWOT analysis, and next I'll throw it to Ashmi Piparia to talk about our benchmark analysis. Ashmi, take it away.
Thank you, Daniel. So we use benchmark analysis to quantitatively validate the SWOT analysis that was developed based on the interview inputs. There are several elements to the benchmark analysis that has been performed. The first element that we look into is investigate the landed cost amongst the 4 countries, namely US, China, India, and Mexico. For this particular analysis, we chose PCBA industry, primarily because we see PCBA products becoming ubiquitous among consumer and industrial equipment as technology slowly becomes pervasive in all walks of life. The landed cost analysis that was performed here takes into consideration a sample PCBA product with its associated bill of materials and direct labor. For this PCBA product, we look into the should cost originating for product originating from each of these 4 countries. And then in addition to that, we look at tariffs and duties, export taxes, and transportation costs, in which case through our interviews with industry experts, it was deemed that it was minuscule. Comparing the 4 countries over here, the analysis reveals that when it comes to just the should cost of the products, China, India, and Mexico are comparable when it comes to their competitive advantage compared to the US. However, for China, it is the 25% tariffs imposed that make PCBA products coming out of China to be more expensive than products that would be made in the USA. So when making a sourcing decision, we highly encourage companies to consider not only the landed cost, but also consider lead times, transportation, and competencies involved in the required domain. While the landed cost makes sense, these other factors are equally important when making a sourcing decision. Next, we also wanted to look into the competitive landscape 5 years out. So in doing so, we decided to take a look into the history before we leap into the future. For the PCBA industry, the major cost elements are direct material and direct labor. In our discussion with the industry expert, we have learned that material costs do not vary greatly amongst different regions as distributors maintain a same pricing policy. Thus, the major arbitrage among the 4 countries come from direct labor and the manufacturing overhead. Historically, what we have seen is China and India have demonstrated larger growth rates for labor compensation, while Mexico tends to mimic US wage growth trajectory. Based on our extensive research, we expect these wage growth trajectories to continue over the next 5 years, with China and India averaging about 9% per annum, while US and Mexico continuing at about 2.5% per annum. Next, we turn our attention to direct material. Here we have been seeing a deflationary trend when it comes to electronic components and accessories market, which form the major raw materials for the PCBA industry. Going forward, we expect the prices of the electronic components to continue to drop. Given that direct material forms a major cost element when compared to all the other elements, any inflationary pressures that we see from rising labor costs or general inflation, we expect them to be counterbalanced by the deflation in the direct material segment. To conclude, looking into 2025, the forecast analysis reveals that the countries will maintain their relative competitive advantage over US and also maintain their positions among themselves. So any sourcing decision that would be made today should hold good for the next few years. Next, I'll pass on to Lorena for the top line analysis.
Thanks, Ashmi. So as you mentioned, the top line benchmark analysis is a main revenue generator for a company within a country. And it is confirmed by 6 main attributes, which is proximity to customers, market size, which is related to population, reputation, potential for growth, product quality, and ease of business. So the United States clearly has a best reputation, market size, and product quality, even though in terms of potential growth, it's not the best. Where thinking about it, it makes sense. It's a fully developed economy, and compared to China and India, its GDP growth rate is not as aggressive. Therefore, confirming with the SWOT results, the US is strongest on proximity to a growing market. Regarding Mexico, its closeness to the US is its largest competitive advantage in terms of this unique top line analysis. And it has a good product quality perception as well as a good reputation. The ease of business is not high, which is surprising, as we have heard various interviewees about the huge benefits, including foreign investment of the maquiladora model that it has brought to the country. And as Mexico does not have an attractive market size itself, it has access to the strong growing markets of North America. India's main strengths are its growth potential and market size. It is poor in businesses, as we have heard also from various interviewees. However, like one of them mentioned, once all the bureaucracy issues are solved, India has the potential to become a world-class production hub, having already the market size it already counts with. And last but not least, China. It clearly seems to be the strongest in half of the items evaluated. However, in terms of reputation and product quality, it is the lowest as it has had a low quality perception for many years, as mentioned by Daniel, but has successfully been doing a solid effort on shifting these stats in the last years. So this is what the final top line benchmark looks like. Moving forward, the best way to interpret this graph, this radar graph, is the item with the most area covered is the strongest for this specific category. So we can see the blue color, which is the United States, is covering most of the area. So when ranking, the two strongest countries are the US, followed by China, then Mexico and India. Now, Marina, please jump in for the soft power analysis.
Thank you, Lorena. And there are so many factors which attract company for the location of their business. The source of soft power could be cultural or human related. We analyze soft power by 7 different aspects. For example, social networks measured by the number of science and technology clusters, working culture measured by working hours and paid leave, innovation, talent pools, communication skill sets, business ethics, and IP protection framework. The US has strong soft power in terms of most aspects. As we observed in our interviews, US has a lot of strong clusters such as San Jose, San Francisco, Boston, Cambridge, and New York City. The US is the world's 3rd most innovative country in the world, following Switzerland and Sweden. There is a red flag on the working culture, mainly because of working hour regulation here, but some interviewees mentioned that labor union in the US is very powerful, which is downside for employers. Mexico and India do not have a lot of competitiveness in terms of soft power. One notable in Mexico would be working culture with long working hours and few paid leave. However, Mexico doesn't have a strong cluster, as pointed out in some interviews, to be an obstacle to move in Mexico. In both Mexico and India, corruption and dearth of IP protection framework are also concerned. China has some competitiveness to the US. Important clusters are growing, such as Shenzhen, Hong Kong, Guangzhou cluster, Beijing, and Shanghai. Also, China has the world's biggest college-educated talent pool. We see that US is the strongest, followed by China, and after some distance, India and Mexico follow. Next, Ethan, please talk about the hard power.
Yeah, in addition to, we also wanted to look at hard power, which we define kind of as the things that countries and governments are responsible for and out of the hands of private companies. We evaluated it on these 6 different metrics, most importantly, trade policy, infrastructure, which was a score based upon quality of roads and road connectivity, railroad density, airport connectivity, and seaport villages, logistics, government programs, access to tech, and also ESG compliance, because when talking with a lot of our industry experts and doing research, they noted that ESG compliance is something that is of increasing importance, and we see will be of importance in the near future. Looking at the United States, we could see that they have a high ranking in pretty much all of these categories with 14 free trade agreements, but their infrastructure is very high. Looking at Mexico and India, we see that both of these countries have medium to low scores in pretty much everything, but it's also important to note that all 3, the United States, Mexico, and India, fall within that 13 to 14 number of free trade agreements. These are the number of free trade agreements, not the number of countries those free trade agreements are with. When we go to China, it has the most number of free trade agreements, as well as strong infrastructure and logistics, and low with government programs. Combining all of this, we can see that in respect to hard power, the United States is strongest, followed by China, and then Mexico and India. We also wanted to look, when we were talking about hard power, look at the binational relationship the United States has with these 3 countries. And first, we looked at the relationship between the USA and Mexico. Mexico is the United States' largest trading partner, with $614.5 billion worth of two-way goods traded in 2019. This is most likely due to their participation in NAFTA and now USMCA. But they do have a good relationship, and they also share a 1,000-mile border as well. Looking at China, there was $558.1 billion worth of trade, and China is the United States' 3rd largest trading partner. However, this current trade war where the United States put $360 billion worth of tariffs on goods from China, and China retaliated with $110 billion on tariffs from the United States. So their relationship is relatively low. Looking at India, it's the United States' 9th largest trading partner with $146.1 billion worth of trade. But there has been recent increases in tensions when the United States did not exempt India from the steel tariffs, and India reciprocated with putting tariffs on 28 of American products. We also wanted to look at the US trade deficit between all 3 of these countries, because that could have helped play to a fact of pushing this post-globalized era. China is only the 3rd largest trading partner, but has by far the biggest trade deficit, whereas Mexico, which is the largest trading partner, only has a deficit of $98.5 billion, most notably because of that two-way trade with USMCA, mostly focused on the auto industry. Marina will now summarize our benchmarking analysis.
Yes, so here's the overall view of benchmark analysis. In terms of bottom line, China, India, and Mexico maintaining their competitive advantage relative to the US in 2025. For the top line, US is most powerful, but China and India have some potential for growth. For the soft power, US still has strong power thanks to strong clusters and capacities for innovation. In terms of hard power, US is strong. China has well-developed infrastructure. However, strong government intervention increases business condition uncertainty, including trade policies. And what do these results suggesting us? Here are main factors companies consider when they decide future locations of their headquarters, R&D centers, and manufacturing plant. For headquarters location, availability of talent is most important. Manufacturing type companies also care about customer proximity, government incentives, and access to material, technology, and information. Service type and product type companies concern also social network. R&D center location, no big difference among 3 types of business. Availability of talent, innovation, and access to material, technology, and information are important. And for manufacturing location, it will depend on trade policy and infrastructure. Especially for manufacturing type companies, cost is the most important factor for their location. Let's dig deeper into geographic preferences. In, please.
Thanks, Marina. So here's a few quick observation takeaways. So Marina talked about the location factors in our analysis. Our survey also indicate there are dynamic movements in short-term and long-term future about customer movement, supply attributes, and industry movement. In short-term, customers are located in China, US, and Southeast Asia. But in long-term future, customers will redistribute, mainly located in China, India, and US. I think that's because of the population and the economic growth. And also the attributes to choose supplier have also changed. The factors not only product quality, cost, and reliability. Also, the company will think about the trade policy, speed, and flexibility for suppliers in different countries in the long term. So in the long term, the industry movements also have changed. The industry movements are diversification. From China, diversified to different areas such as Southeast Asia, Mexico, India, and those are the movements. So at the same time, the company are focused on to generate wealth, mitigate the risk, and improve the efficiency. So in terms of supply chain movement, what will be the next movement, next decision? Avinav will talk about the impact of pandemic and our analysis and the prediction of the supply chain movement.
Thank you so much, Ying. So let's start talking about COVID-19 and what its impact has been. So from our data, we realized that it has had both a positive and negative impact. And most notably, firms which were intensive in IP and tech have seen a positive response. But firms which are intensive in labor, logistics, and single sourcing have really seen the bad effects of the pandemic. So the firms which are intensive in IP and tech have seen boost in sales, all thanks to their investment into digitization and adopting new technologies. Whereas firms which have suffered have encountered challenges with respect to labor. Operational costs have gone up due to new regulations and incentives rising for labor. And remote working hasn't really worked out for them as well as they thought. Additionally, shutdowns have impacted them, halting their production entirely. So with this, firms have actually stopped and thought about their future strategies. And overall, we see that resilience has come to become a main factor in terms of developing a strategy for their future supply chain. So let's start talking about predictions now. This is something which you've all been waiting for. So we really wanted to make pointed predictions. And to start that off, we looked into the key future parameters for our research participants and grouped them by different business categories. Starting off with manufacturing, we see that trade policy is a big factor, followed by proximity to customer and the supplier. For service-based companies, really digitization and adopting new technologies was paramount, along with customer proximity. For product-based companies, on the other hand, sourcing strategy was important and trade policy as well. So while dealing with the data which we had captured, we really encountered a few dynamics at play. Starting off with services, these were really centered around the customer. And for the most part, just wanted to augment their capabilities through technology and digitization. For product and manufacturing, on the other hand, these two were sort of two faces of the same coin and had this sort of push and pull dynamic between them, with products having an agenda for diversification and manufacturing really constrained by clustering effects for the industry. And of course, we have costs, an ever-present factor. With this, we saw a few movements between these categories. So most manufacturing firms were rebalancing away from China and moving to Southeast Asia. China plus strategy started to emerge, and Vietnam and Taiwan were likely destinations. For service-based companies, they were really looking at just transforming this, their operations through technology, and their markets are likely to be centered around the US. For product-based firms, again, their markets are key. US and Chinese markets will remain dominant, and sourcing will likely diversify away from China. And also we saw mentions of the China plus strategy. So let's take a deeper look at what the China plus strategy is all about. The real winners here are Southeast Asia and Taiwan for different reasons. And among Southeast Asian countries, different countries specialize in different industries. But Vietnam came out on top in terms of offering general manufacturing capabilities. Taiwan, on the other hand, specializes in high tech. So there are a few key forces at play here. Trade policy is the first one, followed by clustering effects, a need to stay close to the Chinese supply market, and of course, bottom line effects, which are ever present. But this short-term strategy has its limits. It's really constrained by its ability to ramp up capacity, for which we believe that there are a few long-term contenders, mid to long-term contenders, mainly Mexico and India. They both have their strengths and weaknesses, but do have a few threats which are really detracting them from their success. For Mexico, we see that the lack of clusters is really a detriment. Of course, Mexico does have its upstream industries surrounding around the automobile and electronics industry, but really it still depends greatly to an extent to China to supply its raw materials. India, on the other hand, has tremendous labor capacities, but is really undone by its infrastructure and government bureaucracy. But it is sort of the only viable option in terms of capacity in Asia right now. The other countries really don't compare and cannot even substitute for what China can offer. So due to this, India enjoys a sort of a strategic advantage in that region. Mexico, on the other hand, can have an advantage of resilience for North American supply chains and really benefit and strengthen that partnership. So with this, we see a sort of a pattern of regionalization. Both these countries really favor their regional economies, which are, in case of Mexico, the US, and in case of India, China. Further, we extended our analysis to long term and found that US still has potential to develop its upstream to sort of further its synergy with Mexico in terms of midstream manufacturing. And upstream can involve things like design, equipment manufacturing, and so on. And secondly, we have Eastern Europe as a great long-term contender. Eastern Europe has developing infrastructure and labor capacities. And it also has a great dominant market in Western Europe, which can drive that growth. Thirdly, we have Latin America, most notably Brazil, which has tremendous amount of natural resources and an untapped labor market. And this can tie into the North American supply chain as well. Again, we see patterns of regionalization. With that, there is sort of this emerging strategy, an amalgamation between these three factors: efficiency, cost, diversification, and resilience. Resilience more notably coming through because of the coronavirus pandemic. And again, regionalization seems to be the combination of all these three strategies effectively. And the only real obstacle in its way is clustering effects for industries. And most nations are realizing that, which is why we see a lot of new regional trade agreements coming into play right now. And with that, I'll pass it on to Dan for final conclusions.
Sorry, it was muted. Can't get through a Zoom meeting without that. So wanted to leave you with some broad characterizations, reflect our benchmark and SWOT analysis. That's what it is. My space bars. Okay, so United States, we have an innovation leader now and into the future. Mexico, we have a developing midstream manufacturing hub. Its continued development will depend on how governments and companies deal with certain structural elements. China is a dominant global supplier whose manufacturing expertise persists in the face of increasing competition. And finally, India has tremendous latent potential undone by its infrastructure and red tape. Okay, so with that, we'll conclude our presentation, and now we can take questions. We got about 8 minutes, 6 minutes.
Great, thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Tim, for the great presentation. We have so many questions. So let's start with the first one. And actually, this one will be a great question for Helen. The question is, why did we choose the countries, those 4 countries, right? US, Mexico, India, and China. And that question has been asked actually many times. So let's go with that first. Helen, can you answer that question, please?
Yes. So I guess we are, if we think ourselves as a problem solvers, we follow where the problem is. In the past few years, I suppose everybody is centered around this China-US trade tension. So they become a very obvious choice for us. What do we do about China? What do we do about the US? And what will be the future look like? Centered with China and US, Mexico become an obvious candidate because of the North America supply chain, the proximity to the US market. And with China, it's been a very good question is, if company looking for possibilities to move some capacity, rebalance some capacity outside of China. And China has been doing such a great job. What country potentially could be the candidate? So given the capacity, the size, the population, we picked India. And we did not know whether that would be an obvious, the answer or not, but we thought it would be worthwhile investigate. However, this project just started with the phase 1, right? We selected phase 1 with this 4 country, and we're going to move forward. So I would highly encourage all the audience, if you're interested in this topic, let's help each other. Tell us what will be your interested topic next, and we will look into that. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Helen. We have another question. This question I will ask Tom, and the question is, Chinese government often restrict foreign countries who did something that is not in favor to Chinese government. For example, China restricts the imports of coals and other merchandises from Australia because Australia initialized the investigation of the origin of coronavirus. What effects do Chinese government uses its consumers markets have?
I would say, I don't know if you're talking to me or Tom Derry, but I would say that China and any country for that matter will use things that are in their national interests. So the decisions they're going to make are going to be based on that. I personally think that when I see all this noise of things happening, I think we got to think long term. I mean, the US and China have a decades-long trading partnership, and Mexico, decades-long trading partnership. I guess the question would be, Canada is the 3rd largest trading partner of the United States. So, you look at the situation is it tends to, the trading partnerships, the most trade that's done between countries tend to be geographically locked. The ones that are far away tend to do less. So I think there are always going to be battles with countries that are far away and less battles with countries that are close by. And I think that will be probably, it's been true for decades and maybe even hundreds of years. And I think that will continue.
Great. Thank you, Tom. And actually, just because of the time, I will take one last question. And this one, I will first pick Daniel, but then others I am sure will be able to jump in. The big question is, will the trade tension between China and US get reduced if Biden became the president of US? And what will be the impact of that in the post-globalization supply chain movement? Let's start with Daniel first.
Sure. So, I mean, I think that we didn't talk a lot about this with our interviewees actually, but my general feeling is that with a Biden presidency, you'll see more multilateral agreements. I mean, Ethan talked about the RCEP, which should seem to reduce tension with China and maybe encourage more cooperation with other trade allies, as opposed to sort of the bilateral approach that we've had in the Trump administration. At least I hope the tensions decrease, because then it's kind of better for everybody.
Great, thank you, Daniel. Next, I want to ask that specific question to Ethan.
Yeah, just to add on to what Daniel said, and I know speaking with one of the industry experts, it wasn't so much as if whether or not the tensions will decrease or increase, but more so the stability. Like, people will know what the trade policy of the United States is going to be, rather than it changing instantly overnight via a Twitter message or something like that. So I know when we spoke with them, they were kind of, I don't want to say excited, but excited to have more of like the formal process of how trade policy is going to be pushed forward with the United States.
Great, thank you, Ethan. Last, we will hear from Lorena, and then we will wrap it up. Okay, Lorena.
Regarding the Biden administration,
yes.
Well, like the others commented, I believe that he is supportive of the relationship between US and China. So I expect the trade tensions to be somewhat reduced. So we will see in the following months.
Great, thank you, Lorena. And with that, we will wrap it up. But before we wrap it up, I just want to thank all the participants again, including my students here. And also, I would like to add, the big question that was asked in the beginning was why those 4 countries? As Helen said, this is just the first phase of the project, and we will move on and then do more deeper analysis on other countries as well, which is actually already planned during the winter. We will have an event in January 11, which is more about going deeper down to US-Mexico relationship. So if you're interested, we will share this poster with you from your registration. We will be welcoming all of you, and we are looking forward to seeing you there as well. Thank you all, and stay safe and well. Thank you.